starting a new series. It's called Alive. I've titled today's message, The Gospel, Church Pews and Barstools. Now, if you're a guest here, bear with us all the way through. This is not actually abnormal to talk about barstools in church. However, it might have been in the church you're growing up in. We're going to talk a lot about that over the next 3 weeks. We're going to answer the questions, what is Easter? What is the real crucifixion? What is the rescue story? Today we're going to talk about what is the real gospel. Our series verse for the entire 3 weeks is going to be this one. It's found in Ezekiel 33:6. It says this, it says, but if the watchmen see the enemy coming, if the watchmen see the enemy coming and they don't sound the alarm to warn the people, he is responsible for their captivity. If the watchmen know, if the watchmen see the enemy coming and they don't sound the alarm, they're responsible. That's a big deal. It's a huge deal. It goes on to say, he is responsible for their captivity. They will die in their sins, but I will hold the watchmen responsible for their death. The reason we're using this verse is because we want to kind of convey how important, not just day-to-day living out the gospel is, but around Easter time, the importance of being able to spread the news and the greatest story ever, and that is the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's why we do Egg the City. We don't do Egg the City to be the coolest church in town. We do Egg the City the week before Easter for a reason, because we want to invite people to Easter. Because I don't know if y'all have noticed, but the world seems to be going a little bit crazier every day. Anybody else see that? Right? The signs of the times, we hear about that a lot. I'm not getting into all of that. But at the end of the day, our responsibility as His church, if you're a Christ follower, if you're not, hey, dude, we love the fact that you're here. No sweat. We're going to talk a lot about that over the next few weeks. I encourage you to sit back, soak it in, ask whatever questions you may have. But as Christ followers, if you claim Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, the burden on us is that it is our responsibility to spread the gospel. That's not just church cliche. Jesus talks about it. Ezekiel talks about it. And that's why we're going to dig in over the next 3 weeks. And so let's go ahead and kick in today. And I want to start with this. I have a quirk in life, and it is bathrooms. If I ever get invited to your house, you need to know that in some capacity, I'm going to make my way into your bathroom so that I can find out how you truly are. I'm the guy that's going to go into your bathroom. I'm going to open the medicine cabinets. I'm going to open the closets, and I'm going to judge the junk out of you based on your bathroom. In response to that, when we have people over at our house, you can ask Cassie, my number one quirk is I want the bathrooms clean. I don't know why. That's always been a quirk of mine. Some of y'all, if you're a guest here, you're like, what does bathrooms have to do with the Easter story? It has a lot to do with it. It has a ton to do with it. And we're going to get into that. When I was in Branson, Missouri, Cassie and I lived there for 10, 12. I went to college there, all that. We worked at a place called Dixie Stampede. And in Branson, if you've ever been to Gatlinburg, it's like Gatlinburg on steroids, but they have a lot of shows. And there's one called Shoji Tabuchi. My dad texted me in between services and told me that he had actually died, so you can't go to his show anymore. But that doesn't go away from this. When people would tell me they were going to Branson, they would ask me all the time. They were like, well, what should we do when we go to Branson? I said, well, you got to go to Dixie Stampede, eat some chicken with your fingers. You got to go to the track, ride the big coasters, all of that. But whatever you do, make sure you go to the bathroom at Shoji Tabuchi's show. Don't go to the show. I didn't even really like the show. But I told them to go to the bathroom. And they all looked at me a lot like y'all are looking at me right now. Like, what does this have to do with anything? And why would I take part of my vacation to just go to the bathroom? The show was actually open all day so people could go to this bathroom. I want to show you why. That's the bathroom. It has gold. It has crystal. It has, and all of it, it cost him millions of dollars. He got things shipped in from Japan. This is the guy's bathroom. Okay, now I don't know about y'all, but I ask myself this question all the time. I can't think of a single time in my life that I'd be like, hey, Hunter, you want to go to the bathroom together and shoot some pool? I do not either. I'm not going down that road. My filter's working. There's a lot of comments I could make. I'm not. There's the women's bathrooms, the fanciest stalls in America. Like the latches. Like when you look at this, if you go into these bathrooms, you will never walk into a bathroom again without being a snob. You won't. Like, y'all think Bucky's bathrooms are nice. Bro, this tops the cake. This tops the cake. I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to look at the person on your right. We're not going to do this high five stuff. I want you to turn around. I want you to shake the person's hand on your right and say, I judge you by your bathrooms. All right, for some of y'all, this is your right. Now I want you to turn around and I want you to shake the person's hand to your left and tell them, I bet you got a nicer bathroom than that guy. Do it. Go ahead. It's all right. Good. There you go. We're a real friendly church. Everybody shook your neighbor's hand. Talking about bathrooms in an Easter service. Speaking of that, did you know that globally, it's a real stat, globally 4 out of 5 people don't wash their hands when they leave the bathroom. 4 out of 5. It's a stat. 4 out of 5. Now, I'm sure the person next to you, I'm sure they did. But 4 out of 5 globally do not wash their hands. As awkward and as gross as that is, equivalent to a pool table in a bathroom, the reality is millions of people die every single day. Millions of people die every single day because of an unnecessary and preventable disease. Specifically children. These are real stats. 6.6 million children will not reach their 5th birthday because of a disease that they will get. 2 primary killers are stomach issues within the concept of diarrhea and dehydration, and the other one is pneumonia. 6.6 million children will not reach their 5th birthday for 2 diseases that could be prevented by simply washing their hands when they leave the bathroom. The same statistic in the same medical journals that I was researching this on said this. It said that if people would wash their hands simply after they walk out of a bathroom, that it would cut the stomach virus deaths in half, and it would cut the pneumonia deaths in a third. A third. That means that if you just washed your hands globally, washed your hands, that many people would not die. Here's the ridiculousness of it. Is 90% of homes across the globe, including third world countries, have soap in them, right? Most homes in this world have a bar of soap in them. Ironically, I could not find a bar of soap in our house this morning. I couldn't find a bar of soap in the church bathrooms this morning. Because in America, we don't think about bar soap as much because we use the bougie pump soap, right? But I came across the Operation Christmas Child stuff, and we send bars of soap. And when we stuff these boxes, it's kind of like, it's kind of dumb because these are 2 for 99 cents at Dollar General. Irish Spring, classic. We don't think anything about it. We have readily available soap. 90% of people have soap. If 90% of people have soap in their homes, why are 6.6 million children dying for not washing their hands? If 90% of people globally have soap in their homes, why do so many people die because of lack of soap? Well, I can tell you one reason. In a lot of places, soap is actually considered a luxury, and it's only brought out for special occasions. So what we have is we have people unnecessarily dying, children all across the globe dying, not because they don't have access to soap, but because they don't take advantage or use soap. Like, we all have it. We don't think anything about it. It's everywhere, right? It sounds ridiculous because here's what I know. If you knew that a bar of soap would save your child's life, you would give it to them, would you not? Like, you could go to your cabinet and find some soap, you would give it to them. If you knew that the person sitting beside you this morning was going to die if they didn't get soap, you would have brought some soap to church. If you knew the person at work, if you knew the family that your kids play ball with, if you knew people, even if you didn't know who they were. If I came in here and I said, hey guys, we need bars of soap, we're going to send them to Africa because 6 million kids are going to die, would you be willing to give me some soap? Every one of y'all, I have no doubt, y'all be like, man, I got you soap. 50 cents. 50. Cheap. It's everywhere, right? It sounds stupid. Why are people dying? Why would we not give them the soap? Dumb. But we do the same thing with the gospel. We do the exact same thing with the gospel. Millions of people are going to die today. Hopefully not, but you may know somebody. It may be a friend, it may be a coworker, it may be the person you sit beside every week at church, it may be the person you sit beside at the ballparks. You may walk into your favorite gas station one day, and they may not be there anymore. Millions of people are going to die today. And millions of people who die are going to spend eternity in hell. They're going to spend eternity away from the Father, and we have it accessible. They're not going to spend eternity away from the Father because it's not available. Like, the gospel has never been more available. Like used to, you'd have them little tracts. Y'all remember them tracts? I was a waiter for a long time. I got them little tracts all the time. Love the tracts. But you had to hand it to somebody. Or the Bible in paperback form, right? We still got some of those, right? You know, you can open it up and you can actually read it and you can flip the pages. Used to, you'd have to go travel to foreign lands and be a missionary to present the gospel. Now the gospel's on every single phone. If you've got an iPhone or an Android or a flip phone or a smartphone, if you got a phone available to you, you have the gospel. You can send it anywhere. I can get online right now, and I can send John 3:16 to Africa. I can send it to Europe. I can send it to Australia. I can send it anywhere I want. The gospel is readily available. The gospel's in thousands of different languages. People are dying and spending eternity far from God, not because they don't have access to the gospel, but because nobody shares the gospel. See, if you're a Christ follower, there was a moment when you accepted Christ and you accepted that gospel, and then you put it, like in America, the gospel to us, it's like a bar of soap. It's like, I got it. I mean, at church every day, people talk about Jesus. I mean, it's just kind of what we are. We've gotten so used to having the gospel available that we've long since stopped using it. I want to look at a story this morning with Jesus found in Luke 11. It's a great Easter story. As Jesus was speaking, one of the Pharisees invited him home for a meal. If you don't know what the Pharisees are, it was the religious elite. So he went in and he took his place at the table. His host, the Pharisee, was amazed to see that he sat down to eat without first performing the hand-washing ceremony required by Jewish custom. If you don't know what's going on, so before they eat, they had this tradition. They had this custom that they had to do before every meal that would put you in holiness with whatever you're about to eat. They obviously did not have crawfish. Then the Lord said to him, you Pharisees are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy. In other words, you're so good about looking good. You're so good about doing the tradition. You're so good about looking holy. But inside, you're not clean at all. What sorrow awaits you, Pharisees? For you're careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your garden, but you ignore justice and the love of God. You should tithe, yes, but not reject the more important things. In other words, back in the day, I know it doesn't look anything like this now, but back in the day, they used to walk around so everybody could see what they did, right? They prayed in the streets, they proclaimed in the streets, they walked up to the offer buckets, and they made sure everybody knew who to work, because I'm holy. Look at me. It says, what sorrow awaits you, for you love to sit in the seats of honor in the synagogues and receive respectful greetings as you walk in to the marketplace. It's not like this today, but back in those days, the Pharisees, they were all about the title. They were all about the piece of paper hanging on the wall. They were all about the tassels on the robes. They were all like, look how holy I am, because I am. Fill in the title. He said, what sorrow awaits you? For you're like hidden graves in a field. People walk over them without knowing the corruption they're stepping on. And then one of the religious leaders said, teacher, you have insulted us by what you just said. And Jesus said, yep, sure did. And then he goes on to say, what sorrow awaits you, experts in religious law, for you crush people with unbearable religious demands, and you never lift a finger to ease their burden. Woe to you, you religious people, because you're more worried about how you look and the traditions that you perform than you are that you've become a stumbling block to my Father's kingdom. Woe to you, you're going to be held responsible. You know better, you're a watchman, but you're far more concerned about your tradition and your hand washing than what's on the inside and bringing others to my Father. That's the gist of the story. I like Facebook surveys, and Hunter did one last week. I loved it. He asked about the Redneck Olympics, so I wanted to kind of piggyback on that and do a Facebook survey. I asked two questions. One of the questions I asked is, what is your tradition around Easter? And a lot of y'all did sunrise services. How many love the sunrise services? I loved them, grew up with them. I'm not dogging tradition. I'm not going to dog your traditions. I grew up going to sunrise service. There's a great one right over here on whatever road this is, and Tom Montgomery. It's every Easter I drive by. It's packed out. It's on the hill. It's outdoor. It's beautiful. You should go. But a lot of y'all put sunrise services. A lot of you put egg hunts. We are obviously not against that, because next week you're going to be at Egg the City, right? So some people, you talked about how you boiled the eggs and you colored them. You know, back in the day when you actually had those dyes that you would color them, and then you'd hide them, and you'd find them 3 weeks later because it smelled like bad bathrooms. I saw people in Texas, they would smash eggs on each other's head. They had confetti in them. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of them, but it was very common. We'd walk around church and you'd have an egg smashed on your head. And then I saw some who smashed boiled eggs and raw eggs on each other's head. And that is probably in Brookwood as well, where they apparently spit crickets. I still don't know what that is, bro. It's crawfish season, not cricket season. Anyway, we get this traditions. We all have our traditions. I saw a lot of eating. I saw a lot of Cadbury eggs, saw a lot of peanut butter Reese's eggs, right? I saw a whole lot of dressing up. That's why I wore a coat. I got one. No, I'm not resigning. I have them. Somebody gets married and dies, and I go to those too. But we dress up, right? Because if you dress up at Easter, you're holy. I saw some ladies talk about big hats. How many of you wore an Easter hat growing up? Anybody wear it? Each couple of you wore a hat. I even brought a hat today. If y'all get to wear Easter hats, I get to wear my good hat, my Waffle House hat. See, some of y'all freaked out because I got a hat on in church. And that would be unholy, and you can't pray with a hat on because your prayer hits the bill and bounces down, and God doesn't hear it. Right? I'm all for traditions. I'm all for eggs. I'm all for family get-togethers. I'm all for all of the dress. Now, you can dress up, you can dress down. I'm going to tell you something. At Easter, my wife and daughter's going to have dresses on, and I'm going to have ripped jeans and flip-flops. I may get bougie and go buy me a new pair of flip-flops. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's not tradition that's the problem. It's when tradition overrides the gospel. It's when tradition becomes more important than the gospel that we're supposed to be sharing. Because here's the deal. We live in a culture where we have buildings that looks like Shoji's bathroom.
We have buildings that are ornate. We got gold mirrors. We got great flowers. We got bathrooms that are spotless. We're going to do all these things for Easter. And you've got all these beautiful ornate buildings that cost all this money. And what it's missing is the gospel. You can go hunt eggs. You can do your get-togethers. You can sing what songs you normally sing. You can do all those traditions. Traditions are fine until traditions override the gospel. What Jesus is saying is, woe to you watchmen who are more concerned about your tradition than sharing my death, burial, and resurrection. Because what you're doing is your traditions and your fanciness is getting in the way of the people that I came to seek and to save, those who are lost. You see, the Bible actually talks about dressing up. It talks about don't adorn yourself in a way that those who can't would feel inferior walking in, because it's all about Jesus and not about how you look. And then it goes on to say that God doesn't judge you by your outside clothes. He judges what's on your heart. And Jesus backs this up. You can look as pretty at Easter as you want to, and inside you can look like the very graves that people are walking across. And what he's saying with this, you can have a really pretty headstone, but inside it's death and decay. And at the end of the day, if you're worshiping the tradition and not the gospel, if you're worshiping the stuff and not God, you're worshiping a false God. That's what he's saying. Woe to the watchman. Woe to the ones who would be a stumbling block of the gospel that would save the lives of millions. Are we worried about the hands, or are we worried about the gospel? And the gospel is simple. He came, he died, he rose, he ascended, and he's coming back. It doesn't have anything to do with any of the rest of this. These are all great things, but that's the gospel. He came, he died, he arose, and he ascended, and he's coming back. And here's the crazy thing. A lot of times in a sermon like this, I don't know how y'all wear these things. It's hot, and some of y'all can't focus. The gospel's simple. Some of y'all, though, you had a moment and you accepted Christ, and you hear a preacher talk about the gospel, and you don't think it's for you. Right? Because I already accepted Christ. And I don't need to hear this, and you're already copying and pasting, and you're thinking about that crazy uncle who's coming for Easter that really needs the gospel, and so you've already tuned it out because the gospel can't be for you, right? Well, I disagree, because the gospel is for everybody. The gospel is for everybody every week. The gospel is for everyone. Now, there was a moment that you might say, hey, I walked down an aisle and I prayed with a pastor, or I was at a youth conference and I accepted Christ, or I was at a remix, or I had a roommate in college that led me to Christ, and I said a prayer, and man, I put it in the cabinet. I'm good. I got my fire insurance. I don't need to hear a message about the gospel. And in America, especially in the Deep South, people, if you ask them, hey, are you a Christian? Or, yeah, I go to church. Yeah, I'm a Christian, because that's what we equate. If you walk into a really pretty building on a Sunday, then you've obviously got to be a Christian, because a lot of people equate Christianity and following Christ with a building. They equate it to a building that they walk in, and it's a building that looks really pretty, and they're going to have a bunch of dry talk that isn't going to make a ton of sense, and they're going to recite a bunch of phrases, right? And you're going to get some judgmental looks, especially if you show up like you really are, right? Because you got to look pretty. If I show up and preach in a t-shirt, then I'm obviously not a holy pastor, right? For most people, Deep South, growing up church, it was a chore, it was a burden, it was something you check the box off, in Easter especially, because you got to go on Easter, because if you go on Easter, then you can claim Christianity, right? But here's what I've learned. The religion proclaimed by the Pharisee looked a lot different than the gospel proclaimed by Jesus. It looked a lot different. Jesus wasn't into all of the pomp and circumstance. He walked in, sat down at the table, and wasn't the least bit concerned about the tradition. He was a rabbi. He was a Jew. He knew all of the traditions, but he wasn't concerned about them. And the religious elite, they could not fathom, I can't believe you would not follow our tradition. And then Jesus says, it's not about your tradition, it's about my Father. Everything's about my Father. He pointed people to his Father, and far too often we walk in all dressed up. We're sitting in our seats of honor with our fancy titles and our fancy ties and our fancy speak, and inside we're no closer to Jesus than the dude sitting on a bar stool on a Friday night. Right? Jesus says, woe to you with your traditions. Woe to you with your fanciness. Woe to you with your ornate buildings, because inside You need some soap. You're just as dirty as the rest of them. And the gospel is not a one-time thing. The gospel is not a one-time thing. To say that the gospel is a one-time thing is like saying, hey, I washed my hands once, I'm good. How many of y'all only washed your hands once in your life? If you raise your hand, you're nasty. You're nasty, right? But you wash your hands every day, probably. You wash your hands before you eat. You wash your hands constantly, right? Get a little dirt on it, you wash your hands, right? And that's what the gospel really looks like. You have a moment that you accept Jesus, and after that, the gospel becomes restoration. The gospel is a continual rescue story, right? How many people have accepted Jesus in here and you've had a wreck in life? No, just me? That's cool. Next week we're going to talk about lying. Right? Because the Bible says, for all have sinned, we sin every day. Nobody's righteous, no, not one. Right? I accepted Christ, but that didn't mean everything became bubble gum and rainbows. What it meant was, now I have a Savior to get me through the slips and the mess ups and the valleys and the desert, because I need a gospel every day, because I'm going to mess up every single day. The gospel says when you accept Jesus, you're a new creation. The old is washed away. Your new life has come. We call it born again. But when you're born, that's not the end of it. When you're born again, that's the beginning of it. The same as being born. It's the first step. When you accept Christ, it's the first step. The gospel is ongoing. Life happens. I could go down the list. I teach young new pastors that, hey, go down a list and hit everybody in the room. And I loved what Hunter did last week. Right? He talked about abortion in church. Oh my gosh. You better not talk about abortion in church, because abortion's dirty. It's dirty. We don't talk about that in church. There's a small group for it. You don't do that in church. Because we got to look clean. We got to be pretty. Right? 1/3 of people in church have had an abortion or paid for an abortion. But we don't talk about it in church because it's dirty. He mentioned divorce last week. Whoo! Southern Baptist world I grew up in. You didn't talk about divorce because it was dirty. Right? You don't talk about marriage problems. You don't talk about intimacy problems, because you can't let anybody know that you got a little dirt on your hands. You can't let anybody know that you're fighting with your spouse. You want to have fun. Be a pastor having a relationship series on communication and be fighting with your wife at the same time. It's fun. It's fun, right? We don't talk about that, because the preacher don't ever fight with his wife, right? Because that'd be dirty, right? Because we can't show up to church real. Talk about anxiety and depression in church. Don't talk about that. I don't struggle with that. I don't need that. Hey, that's dirty. We don't talk about that, because if you had enough faith, you wouldn't have depression. If you had enough faith, if you believe in Jesus enough, you wouldn't have anxiety. That's dirty. We don't talk about that, right? We don't talk about value and worth. We don't talk about the fact that you walk around with those words that somebody spoke to you a long time ago and you feel dirty inside. We don't talk about shame. We don't talk about sex performance. We don't talk about mistakes. We definitely don't talk about addiction. We don't talk about those things. There's a time and a place. It definitely shouldn't be in church, because we got to keep it pretty. We got to keep it pretty, right? And some of y'all are like, hey, man, none of that applies to me. Maybe not, but it applies to somebody you know. It applies to somebody in your family. It applies to somebody in your workplace. It applies to somebody you're sitting in this room with. It applies to somebody you know. It's a rescue story. Some of y'all are like, man, why can't we come in? Y'all always got these lists, right? Why can't you preach a good feeling message? I am. It's called the gospel. It's called the gospel that says no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter what valley you're in, no matter what you did on Friday night, there is a rescue story, and his name is Jesus. That's the gospel. And the gospel's for everybody. We need it every week. And somebody you know needs it. The question is, you have it. Are you sharing it? Are you sharing it? Gospel's for everybody. The gospel's about restoration. And the gospel's about invitation. The gospel's about invitation. You know, the guy who founded the church, his name was Peter. He needed restoring. Jesus didn't ask him if he did the traditions. He didn't ask him, what he did in his Kumade. Who did you go and confess to? Did you do 43 of this and 22 of that and make it through the growth? He didn't ask him any of that. He asked him one question. He said, do you love me? He said, do you love me? And by the end of it, he said, now you're restored. And he said, you're going to be the rock upon which this good news is going to spread to the world. See, the gospel is about invitation. The problem isn't availability. The problem is awareness and action. We have the gospel. Who have you shared the gospel with? Far too often we accept the gospel. We put it in a drawer and we don't think about it anymore. There's a stat that says you tell people about salvation your first year after accepting Christ. By year 3, you've only told half that amount. After year 5, you don't tell anybody else about Jesus Christ. And that sounds odd in the deep south because Jesus is everywhere. Jesus is everywhere, right? Well, let me ask you a question. This past week, how many people did you walk up and talk to about Jesus? See, I talked to a lot of people about March Madness. I talked to a lot of people about the brackets. I talked to a lot of people about football and the draft and where Justin Fields got traded. I talked to a lot of people about engines. I talked to a lot of people about crawfish. How many people did I talk to about Jesus? And ultimately, that's what the gospel is. Do you know Jesus? Do you love me? It's not about the building you walk into on Sunday. It's not about how often you walk in. The question becomes, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? Let me tell you about mine. It's called a rescue story. No matter where you've been or what you've done. Because the gospel is an invitation. The second question I asked on Facebook as Dwight comes on up is this. How would Jesus celebrate Easter? What do you think? And it was an amusing answer because almost everybody gave me the same answer. You see, when I asked, what is your tradition with Easter? I got all the eggs and I got all that. Oh, that's fine, right? You know what I didn't hear one time? I invite people over to share the gospel. I didn't hear one time I take that Easter weekend and go out and I feed the homeless. I go out and I minister to the broken. I go out and I wash the feet. I take that weekend to wash the feet of the people who offended me. I didn't hear any of that. But then when I asked the question, how do you think Jesus would celebrate Easter? He would wash the feet of sinners. He'd be sitting with people somewhere simple and he'd be telling them about his Father. He'd be teaching and he'd be preaching to the lost. He'd be ministering to the hurting. And then my favorite answer was this. Jesus rarely did anything that didn't point to the Father. And he goes on to say this. He said, maybe he would have celebrated it. His first miracle was at a party. But rest assured, whatever he would do would glorify and point to God. Now, we've got this whole 3 weeks coming, this big build-up, and we're going to do the Egg the Cities, and we're going to make the building pretty, and we're going to do all these things, and some of us are going to dress up, some of us are going to dress down. The question isn't any of that. The question is, what are you going to do with the gospel? Who are you going to bring to the cross? Right? Does anybody else see the disconnect in these answers? This is what we do for Easter. Well, what would Jesus do? Well, he would do this. They don't match. And we're supposed to be the reflection. What are we doing with his gospel? Because ultimately, it's up to us. Now, I'm going to make a statement. I'll probably be in trouble with the elders. I'll definitely give my fan club something to yip about. You know, I probably, to this day, I've been in ministry 17-ish years. And I probably still feel more comfortable if I walked into a bar than if I walked into most churches. I would. And here's why. Because I spent a lot of time bartending. I spent a lot of time in bars back in the day. And when I'd walk into the bars, I'd sit on a stool, right? And man, I'd tell the guy behind the bar, tell the people beside me. One, they were always happy to see me. Be like, what's up? I hadn't seen you in a while. I've been thinking about it. Where you been? I'm not saying it was functional, but I'm saying it seemed like they cared. You'd be able to talk to other people who were struggling with problems. Again, not functional. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it became a place of comfort for me, right? Before you leave, before you change churches, before you say, oh, the pastor said drinking's okay. I didn't say any of that. For the love. And I'm not leading kids to Ishtar either. But here's the deal. I got squabbles. Here's the deal. What I mean by that is I don't see a lot of difference in the bar stool and the church pew. Done correctly, they really have the same people sitting in them. They do, right? I went to a concert. Cassie and some close friends bought me Zach Williams concert tickets. Probably my favorite artist. He sings Chainbreaker, Fear is a Liar, and he's got this song called Rescue Story. We went down to Montgomery. It's kind of like a Grand Ole Opry looking place, and I'm sitting there, and this lady comes out to open for him, and she's all dressed pretty. She got sparkly pants on. She looks like somebody out of the Grand Ole Opry, and she starts singing this K-Love Poppy stuff. And I look over at my wife, and she's smiling, and I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, bah. But then she started singing this song, and it was called Church Pews, and I wrote down the lyrics, and I'll hurry up. I'm getting somewhere with this. It said, I sat down in an old church pew, same way that I always do, every Sunday morning since I was a kid, and for some reason, I couldn't help thinking about the tales that bench could tell. Of people who sat here just like this, people full of faith, people full of doubt, people all just trying their best to figure it all out. Church pews. They've got stories. They've got so much that they've seen, the best of saints, the worst of sinners, and every bit of it in between. We all come for different reasons, but Lord knows we all need Jesus, and He's always saving room for me and you right here in this church pew. I grew up in this. And then she started singing, Because He Lives, I Can Face Tomorrow. And I started crying. And I got to thinking about all the years sitting on church pews and all the years sitting on bar stools. And all I could think about was, as old as that hymn is, because He lives, because of the resurrection, because Jesus lives, because He's alive, I can face tomorrow, no matter what it is. And then I got to thinking about this bar stool, because then this guy comes out, Zach Williams, right? And he don't look pretty. He had on some ripped jeans, some cowboy boots, and he had on a ball cap. It wasn't as bougie as Waffle House, but he had one on. And he sang this song called Rescue Story. It said, there I was empty-handed, crying out from the pit of my despair. There you were in the shadows, holding out your hand. You met me there. And now where would I be without you? Where would I be, Jesus? You were the voice in the desert, calling me out in the dead of night, fighting my battles for me. You are my rescue story. Lifted me up from the ashes, carried my soul from death to life, bringing me from glory to glory. You are my rescue story. You were writing the pages before I had a name. Before I needed grace, oh, singing songs of redemption, because every time I ran away, you were louder than my shame. And now where would I be without you, Jesus? The lady dressed up, singing Church Pews, had the same story as the guy who said, my parents used to go to the bar to make sure I got home because I was so drunk, who's a mini Grammy winner Christian artist now. And see, when I talk about church pews and bar stools, here's what I mean. They both have the same people in them. Broken people who need the gospel. Some hide it, some dress it up. But the ones who sit here are just as dirty and messed up as the ones who sit here. And at the end of the day, it's not about this. It's not about this. And it's not about any of this. At the end of the day, what ultimately matters is, who are you bringing to the gospel? Because this chair wasn't meant for one, and this pew wasn't meant for one. Because see, when you accept the rescue story, you shouldn't be able to hold it in, because it's such an amazing story of redemption that you should invite everybody you know to get the same saving grace. And it's not saying and reciting something a pastor says. It's a personal relationship. And it says, He rescued me from the valley and from the desert. He is my rescue story. Come with me. I want you to hear about it. The question becomes, who are you bringing to the cross? Who are you bringing to the cross? Who's sitting beside you this morning that needs the gospel? They may look like they got it all together, but inside they're torn up inside. Who at your school, students, needs to hear the gospel? Who needs to hear the gospel at your workplace? Who are you bringing? And one of my biggest fears in eternity is I'm going to be standing there and I'm going to look across the chasm. And while my name may be in the Lamb's Book of Life, I'm going to look over and heaven forbid I got a family member. Heaven forbid I got somebody who sat in my church. Heaven forbid I got somebody who sat in my workplace. Heaven forbid I got somebody who I sat at the ballpark with every day and who was a good friend of mine. And they're going to look at me and they're going to ask one question. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me the soap, man? Because I can't do anything about it now. I had it. It was everywhere. It was at the tip of my fingers. I had the story. I had the redemption. I had the restoration. I had it all. But instead, I put it in a drawer for a special occasion. I got to look pretty at Easter. Jesus said the gospel's messy. The gospel's dirty. And the gospel's for everybody. The question becomes, who are we giving the gospel to? That's what the Easter story's all about. The rest of it's fine, whatever. But ultimately, Easter's about the gospel. Do you have it? And will you share it?